for you. You should see the title slide. You see that there?
I can, yes. Thank you, Erin.
Great, you bet, you bet. Well, welcome everyone. As Lori said, my name is Erin Koss. I'm the CEO at Site Consulting Group. We're going to walk through today, Recruit How to Hire the Best People. This is the first in a series of 3 that we're doing called Recruit, Relate, and Retain. It's an HR series. We're pretty excited about it. We've done it a number of times locally, and we've gotten pretty good feedback on it, and would love to, when we get all said and done, when Lori sends you the survey, if you make sure you fill it out, and just any comments or feedback you can give us. You want different, more, something, more of something, less of something, that would just be really great. I could see this one being we do again for the NAVUG or broader user group community as well. So today we're going to talk about, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are. We're not familiar necessarily with all of you, and you probably aren't with us as well. Just take a quick minute to share that. We're going to cover our topic today, which is recruiting. And then hopefully we'll have some time for question and answer. And as Lori said, as we go through the program today, we will also have a number of opportunities for interacting together. And boy, I'd love it if you'd participate with us. If you feel like, or you don't have a mic, or if you're just not comfortable with that, you know, use the chat box. That's another great alternative as well. And so with that, I'll give you a little bit of background on us and myself. My name, like I said, is Erin Koss. I'm the founder and CEO at Site Consulting Group. I actually grew up helping to build and eventually took over the back office for my own family's small business many years ago, many years ago. It was at that time when I was first exposed to accounting solutions and all the nuances of running a business. From there, I got through college, left the small town I started out in, really, and went and got my CPA license and went to work for a national accounting firm where I really had a neat opportunity in the 90s to help build an Oracle and SAP consulting practice. So it was the first time we started to see ERP in those days at the tier 1 level. In 1999, I started Site Consulting Group, and it was about then that I also moved back to a little bit smaller market. And it was about then when ERP solutions started to become more accessible to small and mid-sized companies. So it gave us an opportunity to shift our focus that in a way that we were passionate about, and also in a way we felt like we could have the biggest impact. So it was a really exciting time for us as well. We did a lot of NAV at that time for sure. Our mission is to invest in individuals and organizations in a way that results in quantum leaps forward and lasting impact. We do a lot of projects in the ERP space. We start strategically and work our way into selection, implementation, and optimization. We are not a solution partner per se, but an independent consulting firm that works explicitly on the ground with our clients. I think if you were to ask us what our secret sauce is, I think it's being able to meet a variety of clients in terms of size and expertise where they're at with regard to the kind of growth at scale journey. So companies that are growing at scale typically need ERP at some point. This is a big part of what we do. You'll see that in the middle column. That's our focus. But at the end of the day, if you've been through this process, what you understand probably really well is ERP is essentially a means to an end. And so it's really, we always say it's not about the software, it's really about your company and the culture and the people, processes, and technology, and trying to get you where you're trying to go. And so ERP tends to be a big lever in that process, but we try and make sure that we're aligned with all of those other areas within the organization so that we're really meeting strategic objectives as opposed to putting software in for software's sake. Our team tends to be super experienced. We've all been doing this anywhere from 10 to 25 years, and you can see along the left side there some of the key areas that our expertise is in. And then on the right side, you see that our values, these are the things that matter to us most. Like I said, a lot of the work that we do is project focused. It's on the client side. So we're on the ground with you every day. And so for us, it's about being good teammates, being collaborative, and partnering well. We're really committed to doing the right thing. We're dedicated to excellence. We believe in being candid and kind, and we try to live a balanced work and personal life as well. So things that when you've been in consulting for a long time and do an awful lot of traveling, this is something we work hard at as well. Okay, let's talk a little bit about you. I think we've got about 6 people maybe on the call today, 6 or 10, maybe almost 10 now. What I would love, so a couple of things. Let's just frame up today just a little bit. In the handouts, you should have, hopefully, I think, Lori, you can tell me a little more about how folks access these. I see them on my, what do you call it, the GoToWebinar control panel. And one of those that you'll really want to have in front of you, download, print it out even, I would encourage if you can, is the one that's called My Notes and Action Items. We're going to be referencing that all throughout, and it'd be nice to have that one particularly on paper if you can. The other four are we're going to refer to as we go along, and it might serve you to have them handy or up visible to you, but it's not imperative, so it's your call in that regard. So let's start for a second. Just take a minute real quickly. And this is something where we're kind of trying out a little different level of interaction if we can. It's something that we do when we've got folks live, and so it's got a little different feel to it, but let's give it a shot. Take a minute and write in the chat box, and we'll, your company name, your role, and the size of your company. Are you less than 25 employees or more? And the reason we ask for those three things is it's kind of helpful for us to know as I go through the next 30 slides, if you will, who's with us. We can kind of tailor the content a little bit that way. And then in just a minute or two, we'll jump over to the next slide where we'll talk about like what brings you here. What are some of the key things that brought you to take an hour out of your day and join us for this webinar? And again, that helps us tailor a little more. And if you'd be willing to maybe share a couple of those as we unmute folks, we'd love to hear from you. So
Sure.
just take a few minutes and let's see what we get.
And as I shared, I know a couple of you don't have mics, but I am going to unmute you all. I unmuted some folks in the beginning. So Ava and Carl and Crystal, you are now all unmuted. I believe now here, yep. A couple folks are self-muted. So if you have background noise.
And that's all it is. Boom, that's it. Yep.
Yeah, definitely. If you've got background noise, you're in the car or in a group of people, if you could mute yourself, that would be great.
Okay.
Let's see if we can pull this off here, Lori.
Well, in theory, that's the best place for it to go because that's the least amount of distance.
And is that Carl talking right now? I might remute him here. Raise your hand, Carl, if you have something to share. And I will share Crystal's here. Crystal did share. Crystal, you're unmuted if you'd like to share. You're an IT manager.
Awesome.
And she's here.
So Crystal, you're the IT.
I'm just in your random invitation. I just started. I'm just adding Crystal to anything and everything I'm part of. So ignore as you wish.
This might actually be difficult if people are in rooms where other people are talking. So raise your hand if you'd like to speak. But I will share that Crystal is here because she will be bringing on a new team member in the next few months. And they are greater than 25 employees. And then Eric shared the company is MKC. His role is developer. And why he's here, he's interested in the HR process. Part of PDP and employees, they have greater than 25. And then we have Sherry from Avanade. She's the manager of sales and support, understanding the messaging about hiring. She has sat in on a couple of others, and she's seeing a common thread, getting more difficult to find qualified hires, and they too are greater than 25. And then Crystal, sorry, she's off mic, but yes, she's from Rhode Island. She shared in that was in the beginning. So welcome.
Right on. Welcome. Well, thank you folks for sharing what you could. I appreciate that. That helps us certainly. Some of the other, one of the other reasons, and I'm going to kind of speak to this in case there's folks that weren't able to kind of talk to why they're here today. One of the things that we see, some of the other reasons we've had folks come join us for this particular webinar is they may have limited HR departments. So a lot of times it's interesting that the group we have here, nobody is from HR. Bigger companies will tend to send their HR folks, and smaller companies will tend to send the managers and the people doing HR in a very practical way on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes as a result, when we have smaller companies as well, the HR training is somewhat limited. And so I think it's a great way. It's neat to see folks getting some experience and some coaching along the way in those ways. Sometimes it's hard to come by when you don't have HR in your back pocket in the office. So,
and I'll share one more here too.
Please.
Yeah, Ava shared that she's with Sharp Healthcare, and they let's see here, she's the access control analyst. She typically participates in interview panels for new hires, and again, their company size is greater than 25, and then she has 5,000 in parentheses. So,
oh, nice. That's a good size company. Right on. Thanks, Ava. Appreciate that share. All right, so let's get started here. Pardon me, my mouse is acting a little funny. There we go. All right. So like I said, today is the first in our series, our HR series, Recruit, Relate, Retain. In October, November, we'll round out the series, and I hope you get some value from today and feel like joining us for the future. During today's session, we're going to focus on the foundational elements related to recruiting the best people for your organization. We're going to talk about how to think about and develop your employment brand in order to attract talent, in order to identify talent you're looking for in your organization, and how to welcome them once they've agreed to come to work for you. So let's go ahead and dive in today. Among the challenges our clients face day to day when it comes to this topic is how and where to find the right talent for their organization. We'd heard a minute ago from, I think it was maybe Crystal or Sherry saying, just the difficulty in finding the right people. It's something we hear a lot about. We hear how hard it is to find dependable employees, those with the right skills and who are actually a good fit for the culture of their organization. It's interesting. Also, you're probably therefore very well aware that as of the end of August of this summer, the unemployment rate was under 4%. I believe it was 3.9. And so while this is great news for job seekers, it means that people have more choices about where they get to work or where they can work, and than they may have in the past. And this creates definitely additional challenges for employers who have to work harder to attract the right fit, the right talent, the right skills. We actually see employers creating a job description One of the things that we wanted to mention is that I was thinking about a study that I just saw from Liz Pellet, actually, is that people don't just take jobs anymore, they're actually after an experience. We particularly see this with the new generation of the workforce coming in. And what's interesting about that is a lot of times people will make the comment, oh, the millennials this or the millennials that. What we're finding is now they've been in the workforce long enough that they're actually having an impact on what those of us in older generations to the tune of the next 2 generations older than them are starting to say, me too, I want to be, I want the experience, I want a little different experience from the company that I work for. And so they're being a lot pickier across the board. In fact, a 2015 survey from CareerArc actually said that 75% of people consider an employment brand before applying. So think about this for a minute. This behavior is not unlike how most of us make buying decisions each and every day. Right? You buy a car, you trust a brand name that you like, you go out to dinner with your family. You're not going to a place where maybe you've never heard of it, or maybe you haven't looked on Yelp to see what the rating systems are. Employment branding has become the same thing. Think about maybe the last job you applied for. At a minimum, you want to know what it's like to work for that company. Do they have good benefits? Are they flexible? Are there opportunities to move up in the organization? You had specific questions and wanted to know what you're getting yourself into. So companies are starting to be more proactive in communicating that information by creating an employment brand. So what do we mean by building your employment brand? Well, many of you are probably familiar with the marketing concept of branding as you apply it to the products and services that you deliver to the market. Well, the same concept applies to employment branding. When you think of putting your brand out there and trying to attract employees into your organization. So let's talk about what is it actually, right? Employment branding is defined as what the organization communicates as its identity to both potential and current employees. It encompasses an organization's mission, its values, its culture, and its personality. So if you think about it for a minute, employer branding is important because it helps you to differentiate your organization as well as the position you're recruiting for. It helps you to attract candidates who have the potential to really mesh within your organization's culture. And as we said, you think about that low unemployment rate, individuals really do have choices about where they work. And so they really are being a lot pickier. And this helps you get on the radar of the right candidates. It's also worth mentioning at this point, I think, that your employment brand really does need to flow directly from your company's mission, vision, values, and of course your strategic plan. So you want all of those things from the top down to be in alignment. So how do you begin? There's a number of ways to approach this. It'll vary by company culture and size, and there's a couple ideas I think worth mentioning today. For those of you with marketing departments, and some of you within the bigger organizations, you'll have these guys. I really encourage you to pull them in. They usually have great branding chops, and they've created some of the assets that you can use in the information that you produce for the marketplace with regard to your employment brand. If you're just getting started with this idea, I would encourage you to assemble a group of key stakeholders. A lot of times, in fact, almost always, these would be cross-functional key stakeholders, usually managers, but oftentimes we'll pull in employees at the lower levels as well, depending on what it is you're trying to accomplish. But at the end of the day, we really believe that brainstorming is always a better way. It's better done in numbers. You're likely to get better information. You're also more likely to get the buy-in that you want when you're ready to execute on your ideas for employment branding. So if you start from the top, think about your business objectives. We talked about this a minute ago, your mission, your vision, your values, and your culture. And you could take them each individually and literally just walk through, what is it you know today about this? What's true about your organization in each of these areas today? And maybe what are the highlights? What are your core competencies? Maybe think about what your company's 3 uniques are. You might consider a survey of current employees, formally, informally, depends on your company, but really to find out what do they think makes you unique. We have actually done this in a couple of places and found particularly great feedback from employees. And also they love to be asked. It also improves the buy-in, as I mentioned a minute ago. So that survey approach can be real effective when you talk about, hey, what do you think our 3 uniques are? If you're a smaller organization, a conference room and a whiteboard is perfectly fine as well. But things like, you might uncover, why do employees like to work for your organization? Maybe your company has a great work-life balance, has a flexible schedule, you're committed to sustainability, different things like that make you who you are as an organization. It's just really an opportunity to figure out what makes your organization special. Once you've landed on how you want to brand yourself as an employer, make sure to review your internal people practices. What we're saying here is making sure that you align how you really behave within the organization with the brand relative to your employment, your organization that you're going to put out there as your employment brand. For example, you don't want to sell yourself as an organization committed to training and development if you never send anybody to training and development type courses, for example. It's a pretty straightforward example, but you get the idea. You just want to be consistent in there. A real quick word about taglines. What we found that's kind of interesting is, as for companies who have really carried this concept through, they've created their market, their brand, and they've taken the time to create it, and they really start to market this employment brand. It shows up on their career pages and their job descriptions. Every time they're talking about their company, this is included. They're thinking about themselves as a brand that wants to communicate who they are to not just customers and vendors and partners, but potential employees. So some of it's funny. It's fun. Some of the things that we see from companies that have created these. One example is Google's tagline, their employment brand tagline. You may have heard of it. It's "Do cool things that matter," right? So cool things speaks to challenging work. Things that matter speaks to purpose, and these directly tie to Google's brand image and ultimately their employer brand. Ernst & Young is EY, as they call themselves now, is a large national accounting and consulting firm. And they say, whenever you join, however long you stay, the exceptional EY experience lasts a lifetime. What's interesting about this one is, it's a little longer, and I wouldn't shy away from that. Again, if it communicates what you're really trying to say. They're an international accounting and consulting firm. They've been around a really long time. CPAs in general who go to work there tend to get their start there, but it's often used in the industry as a launch pad to go into private practice or private industry. And so what they're saying is here, hey, you're going to have this great experience here no matter how long you stay. What these guys really care about is that long-term relationship with the network they build of the many CPAs that come through their organization. That's what they're known for. And then finally, Southwest Airlines, particularly those of you guys on the eastern side of the United States. We don't get the benefit of Southwest much here in some of the smaller areas, but we do love them, to be sure, when we travel. And their slogan or their tagline is "Welcome on board the flight of your life." You know, they're pulling in their industry sort of tongue in cheek. Life implies people come and stay for a long time, and as an employee out in the marketplace, maybe that appeals to you. And maybe it must be a great place to work. If that's what you seek, it might just be the place for you. So it has a bit of a wow factor. So when you're thinking about coming up with a tagline, just ask yourself, what is the central message you want to get across about what the company does, or more importantly, what the company is about? What basic human desire does working for you fulfill, right? The flight of your life, cool things that matter, right? This speaks to human desire about what matters to a person. What spirit, values, or attitude do you want to convey? And so once you've sat in the conference room, done your brainstorming, this may be the one of the results that comes out that really can fuel some of the marketing materials that you put out into the world. Once you gain some clarity on your employment brand, it's time to consider how to market your brand and create awareness. And you know, we're all familiar with social media now, but some of the ideas that we've seen our clients execute effectively on, and boy, they've done a neat job in this area. One is creating and sharing videos of what it's like to work there. These could be iPhone videos anymore. They're 30 seconds to 2 minutes long. They're employees, they're leaders, maybe it's the CEO, but maybe it's also employees, and maybe it's front and center on the homepage, or maybe it's on the career page, or both. Maybe it's something you put through Facebook or LinkedIn, depending on the type of organization that you are. But what we see here is people really watching these videos a lot, and we think getting a lot from them based on just the click-through rates on this type of media. Maybe you sponsor information for professionals in the forms of blogs and forums, luncheons, and training in your local community. Finally, maybe connecting with a school or university is the way to go. You might also consider attending various networking events in your community which are relevant to your organization. However you approach it, though, what we generally recommend is finding 3 places, this magic number 3. It's small enough that you can manage it and big enough to where you can make an impact, where you commit consistently to communicating the elements of your employment brand so that over time and before you need to hire, you are already out there where you need to be seen by potential employees. So before we move to discussing how to approach recruitment for specific positions, I'd like to wrap our employment brand discussion by doing a short exercise just kind of intended to get you started. So if you have in front of you, I hope, the notes and action items page, you'll see the first section there is talking about what your 3 company uniques are. Now, my goal here is to just have you take 2 minutes and just jot down as many as you can think of, just kind of off the top of your head. And then if you'd be willing to, maybe share 1 or 2 of those with us. The goal is that when you go back to the office, you take this page with you and you're already a little bit started for that conference room session with the key stakeholders to continue this brainstorming process. So just take a quick minute and see if you can't jot down a couple of your company's uniques.
And you can type them in the question box. I'll be watching that, or you can raise your hand and share them verbally. Does anybody want to share? Quiet group here today.
And that's totally fine, no problem there. We can definitely move on. Lori, if you tend to see a couple of show up as we move along, feel free to just interrupt me.
Okay.
We'll go ahead and keep moving.
Okay.
All right, thanks folks. Now that we've created our employment brand, we've become more strategic and intentional about how we attract talent to our organization. Next, we want to turn our focus toward how to screen for the best talent. We want to maximize our effort by following a proven process, a structured process, if you will. And pardon me here, my slides, my mouse is going a little AWOL. There we go, pardon me. Let's try that again. All right. So, a structured process. What we like to include, we like to keep it simple. Bigger companies have more steps oftentimes. We try and keep it as simple as possible so that it's accessible by any size company. So first of all, we talk about planning before you post. We want to use screening best practices. We also want to use interviewing best practices. And then finally, we want to have a process for pre-placement processing. We're going to talk about all 4 of these in more detail. So having a plan before you post and following some basic steps is important. You'll encounter candidates who have similar experience. It'll help you clarify who does what within your organization as the recruiting process unfolds. So before you post, there's 3 things that we recommend our clients have done at a minimum. And the first of those is developing a job description and an announcement. Sometimes these are relatively similar, sometimes they differ. Depending how you approach doing the posting itself. Knowing the salary range of the position before you post. And then finally, knowing where you're going to post or advertise the position. So something to consider and that we recommend making part of your process is having all candidates complete an employment application. It's not a legal requirement, but it does help during the screening process to have gathered information from your applicants in a consistent way. It also takes a little extra effort on the part of the candidate, as opposed to today in this day and age, most people are oftentimes are applying online at a variety of different portals, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes. But it keeps them from just uploading a cover page and a resume. It'll also tends to save you time when you go through the screening process to have everybody filled out the same type of information. You're likely to get candidates those that are willing to take the time to fill out the application are usually likely to know more about you, tend to be a little more interested in you as an organization, and hopefully a little more qualified. So again, helps you in the screening process. The other thing is in these applications, you can include a disclaimer allowing you to complete employment and or reference checks. And it also provides a set of information the applicant is affirming is true. So one thing to keep in mind with the employment application is a law. It's not quite so new anymore, but back in January of 2016, there was a new law that went into effect, kind of generically titled Ban the Box. And what this is, it went into effect in 11 states. So if you're in one of these states, you can check your Bureau of Labor and Industry state website usually to find out. Just be sure to know if your state is one of these. So it's a question about whether an applicant has been convicted of a felony. It's no longer allowed on an employment application. It can be asked later in the interview, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that now, but just wanted to bring it to your attention. Next, we talk about the job description and the announcement. There's lots and lots of examples available online. What we find is most of our clients find a style and a format that works for them, can be used consistently and easily for them, speaks to their employment brand, maybe in some of the sections they include, and they use it as their standard. We recommend this approach because, again, being consistent from beginning to end will just make the process far more efficient for you. And next, we talk about uncovering a salary range for the position for your area. We use a resource, we use salary.com more often than not. There's various ways to get this information. We find salary.com to be pretty consistent, pretty reliable for providing a range based on your location and based on very detailed aspects of the position you're looking for. It can take a little bit of work to hone in on the specific position, and we usually find it to be pretty valuable information. You want to make sure you balance this against the other positions in your company. Generally companies have a culture of paying at the low, medium, or high end of a range. And of course, you want to just be real sure you're in line with what you're already doing. So because nothing's worse than you get a great candidate in there and you realize you're miles apart in terms of salary, or you've made an oops relative to your own planning. It's just not a great place to be. When we talk about advertising, this is more about actually just posting. As for myself, around our firm, I've yet to see where paying to sponsor a job posting actually pays dividends. If you've experienced otherwise, pop something in the chat window there and let me know. I'd love to hear. There's a number of places to place your posts for your job, including online job sites like Indeed, Craigslist, Glassdoor. Facebook also has a portal for this now, as does LinkedIn. Truly, we're finding, depending on the position, you might also find industry sites or local professional organizations a good idea as well. Of all of these, in terms of the portals, we're seeing Indeed as the front runner for being having the most appeal to the most number of companies, industries, and prospects. Facebook and LinkedIn tend to be a good play, really depending on the specific aspects of the position. And if you want to talk more about that and get some information on that, feel free to ping me afterwards. I'd be happy to chat with you about that. So once you begin receiving resumes, applications, etc., it's time to review them. We have a tip sheet in your handouts, and I think our internal HR staff put these together, and I think they did a really nice job on these handouts. So I really encourage you, especially if you're not in HR, these can be really helpful. We've used these at a lot of our small and mid-sized clients to just try and get them some of the key basics to get started without being overwhelming. So we've included those in your handouts, and there's more information on screening resumes, but today we'll briefly discuss kind of several key areas to keep in mind when you're doing this screening. First thing we think about is longevity of employment. So when you're looking at the information you receive, take a look at how long have they been at every location. A red flag, and you may be familiar with this, when you see someone's jumping around every year, that may be somebody that doesn't even make it through the screen, depending on how concerning it is, or if they do, it's definitely something you want to ask during the interview. But this is usually an initial screening for this can be a differentiator pretty quickly. You want people who've been able to hold down a job. Relevant and related experience. Do they have the experience that's related to the job description you're asking for? You'd be amazed, right? Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. Be aware of the use of social media to gain information about candidates. There's some legal ramifications to this. You just want to be careful. We do usually take a peek, but you want to be real careful in how you use that information if you do at all. Sometimes it's just helpful to get a sense when you have sort of a gut from another bullet, if you will, longevity or relevant experience. Sometimes it's helpful to confirm or deny it, just kind of a gut reaction, but you do have to be really careful with this one. Consider a phone screen. I love this graphic down here. It always cracks me up. It's a good example of why you need a phone screen, right? I've included two handouts that I'd like to highlight here. One includes tips and tricks for the interview itself, and the other is a handout on developing good interview questions. I actually, to this day, when we do interviews, whether that's for clients or for ourselves internally, I go back to these every time. During our time today, I'll just highlight a few of the points in here. For starters, use lawful and defendable practices, right? It wouldn't be an HR training course if we didn't talk about this topic. It also probably goes without saying that you want to ensure that all steps in the process are lawful and defendable. The interview just tends to be an area where we find employers have the most trouble. So what do we mean when we talk about lawful and defendable hiring practices? Well, the federal and state governments require that employers provide equal opportunity to candidates and not discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, including pregnancy, national origin, age, disability, or genetic information. So innocent questions, right? You're doing an interview with somebody. In fact, I'll never forget when I was 23 years old, I was at Arthur Andersen and I was greener than a green bean. And I had this great rapport with this gal that I was interviewing. And I was so excited to be part of the interview team. And I went in there and we got to know each other, and we'd done a lot of the interview. And I said, so are you married? Do you have children? What are you thinking there? And of course, I had no idea. And I came out of the the interview, and I'm like, oh, gosh, I said, here's the things we really like about her. And anyway, I was debriefing with my manager, and I was saying, and these things about her being married and with children. And he looked at me, got white as a ghost, and said, "You've got to be kidding." I said, "What do you mean?" Well, these are questions that are unnecessary information, and possibly an unsuccessful candidate might think that we use unlawful reasons for making a hiring decision, right? Whether someone's married or not or has children or not is not relevant to whether or not they can do the job. So just be real careful with these questions. A good guideline is to think about stick to interview questions that are really focused on a candidate's qualifications, and make sure your reasons for choosing one candidate or another are based on knowledge, skills, abilities, and not for any of the reasons like marital status or the social groups they're in, or the organizations they're involved in, etc. It's going to be a problem. Listen first. So this is one where, your interview is really an opportunity to learn about the candidate, and you learn by listening. It can be easy to begin the interview just, and sometimes this comes from nerves, it comes from excitement, it comes from just loving where you work. But oftentimes it's easy to just go into a room and start telling a candidate everything they would ever want to know about the organization, how much you love it, and things like that. And the problem with that is it's going to not only bias, when you finally do get to the questions, they're already biased about what it is you want to hear at that point, potentially. So, it's really try and manage. We recommend that when you sit down for these interviews, manage the candidate's expectations a little bit by giving them an overview of the interview. Explain that you have some questions that you want to ask them first. And that'll help settle you down into your chair, into listening mode a little bit as well. At least it helps me anyway. And then make sure you let them know that at the end of the interview, you'll be answering any of the questions that they have. So you're setting the stage for sort of how the interview is going to go. But your job, again, really be a great listener. Make sure you answer their questions to the best of your ability before they go. And if there may be some questions you can't answer, that's no problem. Just acknowledge that you're not sure, don't know. Sometimes there's topics that you can't answer, and you have to own that. Maybe you aren't able to share the revenue number for the company. It's a small privately held company, and that information isn't public. So, that's not something I can share with you. Or I don't know, let me find out. If you think it might be a different type of question, then you could share. And just make sure that you get back to them when as soon as you can. Next, in our interviewing best practices, we talk about developing useful interview questions. This is something you want to do ahead of time. I'm amazed at how many people go into interviews and think they're just going to wing it, particularly people who've been hiring for a very long time. Just because you've been doing it a long time doesn't necessarily mean you don't need to prepare. And we find that, over and over, interviews go much better when you've prepared ahead of time the questions that you want to ask. What I tend to do is prepare about 10 questions. I oftentimes might only get to half of them, and that's fine. What I love about doing more than less is that it allows me to pivot a little more easily with regard to the specific candidate and things that are coming up where I think I want to dig into one area or another, maybe a little bit more. I've got those questions right at my fingertips, and it's just really helpful. So, I'll take the job announcement or the job description, I'll review it, highlight any notes or competencies that are needed, that we know that we need, and then I'll add other topics that I might want to ask questions about, things like teamwork, company values. And then from that list, I'll generate my interview questions. And I always go back to that list and that handout that I gave you and kind of compare and contrast kind of where I'm at, make sure I've got everything I want to have. I also want to highlight with those, the list of interview questions, that asking behavioral-based interview questions, and you'll see in the handout that we've got a lot of those in there. Behavioral-based interview questions ask how someone has performed a task or handled a situation in the past versus how they would handle it in the future. So for example, instead of asking, what would you do if you had a difficult customer? You would ask, tell me about a time you had a difficult customer situation. What happened? How did you respond? So you can see where when you ask a hypothetical question, it's usually sort of, they'll give you this quick kind of pat answer. What we want them to do is really think back to a specific time and give just more and more detail. And I encourage you to say, and can you say more about that? How did you feel about that? How did you handle that? Again, lots of little follow-on questions, and dig as deeply as you think you need to try and get at the behaviors that showed up for this individual when they dealt with a hard situation. A little bit of caution here, or just maybe some advice. One of the things that can be difficult with some candidates is no matter how many times you ask it in a behavioral style, they will still answer in a hypothetical way. You may need to be bold and redirect them in a very kind and candid way. Hey, boy, I appreciate your response, and I really would love for you to give me a specific example. And say, hey, you know, sometimes it can take a minute in an interview situation where maybe there's nerves or whatever, and to think about a specific. God, take a few minutes to do that. You know, give them the time that they need to just think about it for a minute, because it does take some thought, and be sensitive to that. But I encourage you to be bold and really get them to try and answer the question. They're about 10% of the time, you just won't be able to, has been my experience, and you'll just have to move on. And that'll also tell you a lot of what you need to know during the interview, frankly. Next, we talk about, oh boy, document, right? It's always important to document your first impressions of a candidate. You document as soon as you leave the interview, pen and paper, document sooner than later, as soon as possible after the interview while things are fresh in your mind. Especially when you're interviewing lots of candidates, this information will blur together faster than you can even imagine. Some tips, and you might want to grab your pen if you're interested. These are some quick tips on how maybe to make sure your documentation is helpful for you, but also defendable at the end of the day. So be specific. That's the first thing we think of. State what you observed, not what you felt like necessarily. So I observed, being specific, the candidate did not make eye contact, or the candidate was clear and concise in responses, not I didn't like them, something like that. So again, what you observed, and be specific. Next is be lawful. Ensure any notes you make to support your evaluation are lawful, and don't reference anything protected by federal or state law. A lot of the things we talked about a few minutes ago. Finally, be consistent. Evaluate all candidates on the same criteria, and don't give someone a pass because you had something in common or thought they were more attractive than the others. It's amazing how our own personal biases can really come into play. And I'll be frank with you, you know, our HR professionals in the world who have a lot of training in this space and have a lot of experience, this becomes easier over time. And so this is why, for those of us that aren't necessarily HR every single day, this consistency of process is so important. This preparation for the interview is so important, because it really does help you protect yourself and the organization, as well as be fair and consistent with your candidates as well. Again, I'll refer you to the handouts that I've given you. I think there's some really great stuff in there to help ensure that you have a successful interview process. Once you've identified your finalists and you've made an offer, it's helpful to have the offer documented in a letter. Many companies use different tools as part of what we call pre-placement screening to help ensure the information about the candidate that they've given you is accurate. Keep in mind, again, you need to be consistent in how you screen your candidates. So for example, all candidates should follow the same process, or if you have different screening processes for different types of positions, that should be very clear. Again, this helps to ensure that you're treating everyone the same, particularly in organizations where a lot of the interviewing and hiring process is pushed down to the functional management areas and layers of the business. Maybe there's not a lot of HR support, or where it is kind of decentralized in many parts of the process. This can be really, really important to just have this consistency in the way you're doing this process. Larger companies tend to have more steps, as some of these pieces can have costs associated with them, but doing something is always better than nothing at assuring that you're selecting the right candidates for the role. So let's talk about a few of the things, some of the basics. Employment verifications. You know, this is an important thing to do because it's essentially free. It just takes your time. You should have a signed statement from your employment application that gives you permission to verify employment. Gives you the permission to call their prior employer and say, hey, did Betty Jones work here from point A to point B? and they can say yes or no, everything's legal, everything's, on the up and up, and it can be documented. It's very objective. So some employers will require a signed authorization in order to give you this information. So again, that's why we like to include that in our employment applications. Typically you'll want to verify dates of employment, position held, salary, if they will provide it. A lot of times they won't. And whether they are eligible for rehire or not. That's always kind of an interesting question that a lot of people overlook. So Betty Jones comes to you, she's in the process of kind of that pre-placement processing, and you ask her, hey, would you be able to go back and get a job at Smith Manufacturing? And she says, no. And you can dig into why. Some of the reasons why usually have a fair amount of information in them. Sometimes you'll get additional information, and sometimes it's helpful. Reference checks, people feel usually one way or the other. They either say, gosh, they're super helpful, or they aren't at all. We tend to believe, though, they aren't always the most effective way to gain information. It's amazing what you can uncover in both subtle and sometimes less subtle ways when you make the time to have these conversations, right? Because the thought is that, well, gosh, they're only going to give me a reference for somebody that loves them. Well, you would be amazed. So I encourage you, even from folks who love them, and for guys that might be a little on the fence when you call them, the information you can glean is just is typically more important than you think. And I wouldn't overlook this. Next, you have a background check. Many companies will complete a background check to review criminal history on a candidate. They're usually performed through a third party, and usually they always require the consent of the applicant. Again, this is something that they give you consent for on the original application, and there's usually a small cost, and we highly recommend them. Again, lots of information, big bang for the buck in this case. Drug screening. So while all the screenings we discussed are typically done after an offer is made and accepted, they can be completed before as well. Some companies do this. It should be performed after an offer is accepted. After an offer is accepted, or it could violate the 80 or the American with Disabilities Act. And finally, sometimes for some types of organizations, there's other screenings or verifications that need to take place. For example, if you're working at a hospital, you need to verify some licensure and also track certifications such as a CPR certification. So depending on time, if something does come up, be sure to seek input from a trusted HR partner or an attorney. Again, when some of this hiring process is decentralized outside of HR, this is where, whether that's your internal HR manager, an outside HR partner, or an attorney, it's just sometimes you want to make sure you're discussing some things that show up in this area with those folks. They're going to have the background to really help you. We recommend that most of our clients, even those that have HR in-house, almost always have an employment attorney on speed dial. It's just, again, you just can't know everything. Finally, make sure you follow up with any candidates you don't hire. This is something that sometimes people don't do. Again, you're about creating an employment brand that resonates and that speaks to the kind of organization that you are. We want to make sure that we're, in case those candidates show up again, or they may be a candidate that we would hire again, but somebody was slightly better, we want to make sure that they are treated as kindly as possible. So quickly, and I'm looking here, I just want to do a quick time check here. This one, I think Lori, are we at 1:56?
We are. Yep, we still have some minutes left.
Okay, so I'm going to just highlight this, but I'm going to keep rolling because we're running a little bit behind, and I just have to ask for your forgiveness here. I'm usually right on the money here, rarely go over, but this one's a little longer than I expected. So what I would encourage you to do here is, while things are fresh in your mind, take a few minutes, go back to that notes and action items, and just as you think about screening, the interview process, the pre-placement process, what are 3 things that come to mind in those areas? And you'll see that I've got the slides with the details in your notes there. Just see if you can't come up with a couple bullets that you want to highlight when you get back to the office where you could make improvements in your area. And I'm even going to pop right over this guy too. just to save us a little bit of time. Next, we want to talk about a successful onboarding program, because this is really the foundation for helping employees feel connected to the organization. Employees who are connected to the organization will also tend to be more engaged, and they'll stay longer. So you've created an employment brand, you've gone through the recruiting process, you've attracted the talent, you've screened, you've interviewed, you've recruited, you've done all this work, and now it's time to onboard them, right? We're trying to welcome them to the organization. The last thing we want is to have great people leave half an hour after they arrive. And I was at a webinar recently where it was said that research and conventional wisdom both suggest that employees get about 90 days to prove themselves in a new job. The faster they feel welcome and prepared for their jobs, the faster they will be able to successfully contribute to the firm's mission. So just like with screening, interviewing, and pre-placement, it's important to be intentional and have a consistent, well-documented process here. You're making sure all employees follow the same process and have access to the same resources for onboarding can really help ensure that employees feel welcome, feel part of the organization, and have what they need to hit the ground running. The consistency also contributes to helping people live the company values and internalize the company values as well. When you're building an employee onboarding program, there's a lot of different ways you can approach it. But one way to approach it is just to consider your goals, right? Is retention your goal, connection to the organization's strategic plan, increased productivity? Think about what it is that is really important to you and your culture. What kind of measurements are important? How long an employee stays, how long, I'm trying to think of another metric that makes sense, but how long do they stay, what the turnover rates are. Different statistics like that can help you assess how successful your onboarding program is. A final word about the benefits come from a study actually published by the Society for Human Resource Management. The study showed that successful onboarding programs do some of the following things. They improve organizational retention rates, productivity, overall customer satisfaction, right? These are people outside your, right? The people that you serve, your customers outside your organization, actually their satisfaction rates increase when you have a successful onboarding program. This is a big deal. I would also speculate this applies to all of the organization's business partners, including vendors. So there's a lot to be had from a successful onboarding program. Additionally, employees tend to have greater job satisfaction and a higher commitment to the organization. So I'd like to take a few minutes here as we're coming to a close and talk about what we like to call the 4 C's of successful onboarding. Compliance, clarification, culture, and connection. We're going to discuss these in a little bit more detail. And as we do, think about your onboarding program and which areas you have strengths in and which areas you have weaknesses in. Again, using your notes and action items pages to jot down some key things you want to remember when you get back to the office. So let's start with compliance. This is the starting positions, the basic stuff. Bare minimum, think of it that way. These are things like an I-9, a W-4, policy-related rules and regulations, new employee orientation. So these are the things that you gotta have. Next, let's talk about clarification of roles and responsibilities, right? Reviewing the job responsibilities, expectations, and resources, right? We think, well, gosh, these were in the job description. We talked about these in the interview. They remember this, right? No, they don't. It's like a bad game of telephone where there's more than one person involved in the interview process. A lot of time has passed. Here they are hitting the ground and they're drinking from a fire hose as they, join you for the first day with your organization. They're thrilled to be there, and yet it's important to clarify what their job responsibilities are, what the expectations are, and where are the resources for them to get help when they need it. If their job includes on-the-job training, beforehand, during, down the road, set that expectation for them, inform them of that. People don't like surprises. Tour the facility, take them around, show them around, help get them acclimated, not only to where the break room is, where the bathrooms are, but also where are the other functions in the organization and where do they sit? Especially my manufacturing companies, I love to take the professional staff out to production and the production staff into the professional admin building, because a lot of times they're separate, and they don't spend a lot of time crossing over. And so getting that initial acclimation can be really important. Ensuring their workstation and equipment are set up before new employee starts. This one always makes me chuckle, because I can't tell you the number of times I've seen this one come up short, right? The new person's been all over the building, met everybody, you know, drinking from a fire hose, and they finally get to their office to start work. There's no computer. Or maybe there's a computer, but there's no way to log in. I bet this resonates for some of you. So you watch the scramble ensue. It feels a little funny, and yet it kind of isn't, right? And you can imagine at the end of the day how this feels to a new hire. New employee orientation. We recommend some kind of new employee orientation. The bigger the company, the more drawn out this might be. You'll see this come up in every one of the 4 C's, because there's a different context for this conversation. Culture, how do things work around here? The third of the 4 C's. You know, new employees were exposed to your culture a little bit during the interview process. It's probably a huge part of why they came to work for you, and they saw your amazing culture. So now they're hoping, maybe even expecting, it'll fit them like a T. So don't let them down. Ways to help them get acclimated include a buddy or a mentor program. I really love this one, especially for mid-sized and larger companies. It just can really help new employees from getting lost in the shuffle, especially fast-growing companies where people are swamped and busy and things are crazy, high energy environment. People can really get lost in the shuffle. So I really encourage this. New employee orientation, again, relative to culture. What's the dress? What type of activities are part of daily life? How do we engage employees? Is there a casual Friday? So things that are relative to your culture and the way you guys function, what's there to know? All staff or department meetings. When, where, who, and why when it comes to company meetings, right? Nothing's worse when you're the new guy not to know that you've got a staff meeting every day, or that the company picnic is on, you know, Friday, or, you know, company lunch is brought in every Friday and you're the guy that doesn't show up. Finally, company traditions, which would be good to know, right? Is it the summer picnic? Is it the holiday party? Just what are some things that really speak to the culture that would be great to know? You know, a lot of times as well, not all of this stuff here on the culture side, but a lot of the things in the 4 C's can be included in an employee handbook at some level. So, you know, sometimes it's a great way to just make sure that the things you want to cover in the onboarding process are documented. That's sometimes a great way and a great reference to have to ensure you cover everything. Though, do not expect that you're going to hand it to the employee, of course, and that they're going to read it all. Lastly, connection. In this context, related to the vital interpersonal relationships and information networks the new employee must establish. You know, for example, we talk about within their department, this type of decision should be run by this person, or when considering doing X, you want to pull in the marketing department. So what type of relationships and networks matter for them in their role? This may be part of the onboarding process that the people in their own department do. We're also talking a little bit here about helping them understand the politics or the information network that they may need to utilize in order to get information. So some ways to help employees feel connections with others and build stronger relationships include, you know, before they start, send them a welcome letter. Gosh, we can't wait to see you. You know, this is the person you're going to look for, you know, you're going to look for when you get here. Maybe it's an agenda of how their first day or week will go, things like that. Just ways to say, hey, we're looking forward to seeing you. Again, we talked about the buddy or mentor program, informal social interactions, you know, being really intentional that first day, week, month, however it works for your company best, but intentionally arranging a variety of people over the first number of days can be really helpful. Take them to lunch, stop by, check in with them, things like that. Stakeholder meetings, making sure they're aware of the meetings that are relevant to them. That'll help build their informational network, learn about the organization and the existing social networks. And then lastly, make sure, and this is a really big one, I think, is after all that's said and done, make sure that you're scheduling really intentional follow-ups with the new hire at key intervals, 30, 60, 90 days. It just can be really important. You know, you get that big hug and all that rah-rah that first day or week, and then it sort of drops off from there. You know, it can really feel it can feel kind of yucky, if you will. So continuing the group hug, if you will, as long as you can, to just make sure they really get acclimated to your organization, I think can be a really big win. All right, so this is one of those pause moments, and I'm going to again kind of blow by here for today in terms of too much time, just because we are running out of time. But do encourage you to grab your notes and action item page and think of 3 ways that you can enhance how you onboard your employees. Just scribble them down real quick so that when you go back to the office, you've got them top of mind. And then finally, let's wrap us up here with a summary and final tips for success. We talk about strategically focusing on employment branding today, right? Top down, being proactive in your recruiting so that you can find quality applicants, which will be a good fit for your organization. We talked about developing a clear recruitment and screening process to help you identify if the candidate is a right fit for the position. We talked about implementing an onboarding program to help your new hire feel welcomed into the organization and be able to contribute more quickly. And lastly, and not least, when it comes to HR and being, making sure we're making lawful and defendable hiring decisions. With that, I'd like to just take a minute. I know we've lost a couple of people who had to wrap up at 2, but if there's any questions or comments that you'd like to make or feedback that you'd like to offer, we'd sure love to open that up real quickly.
Sure, and we do have just a few people left on the line, and they are hanging on here. There isn't any questions in the question box, but thank you, Erin, for putting your contact information here so they can contact you directly.
You bet. And please feel free, again, any questions about the handouts that we gave you or any kind of follow-up comments or concerns, that would be great. Really enjoy being with you all today. Lori, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for joining, and watch for the additional webinars in this series coming up soon, and we will hope to see you all on another webinar real soon. Bye for now.